Not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha everyone, this is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
You're the first thing on my mind when I wake up with the morning sun and when I'm dreaming at night. Next to you, the only place I wanna be. You got the fruit, wanna shake up your tree. Don't want the juice if it's not worth the squeeze. Just say the word, cause you do what you please. Oh girl, you can't say what is on your mind. What you like, your world brighter than the stars that shine. Your name in the lights, baby, you'll always be my number one. Cause you're the first thing on my mind when I wake up with the morning sun and when I'm dreaming at night.
You put the ease in that cool summer breeze. Bring the good in the vibes that I need. Live underwater, you're the oxygen I need. You got claim to my throne as my one and only queen. Oh girl, you can do what you want to, you know. Wherever you go, your world. Let go what you can't control. You're never alone. Baby, you'll always be my number one. Cause you're the first thing on my mind. And when I wake up with the morning sun and when I'm dreaming at night. When the weight is heavy on your shoulder, rest your burden of mine. Because you'll always be my number one until the end of time.
Treating you right. Things are changing now that you're mine. Give you loving every day and night. Baby, you'll always be my number one. Cause you're the first thing on my mind.
And when I wake up with the morning sun
and when I'm dreaming in the night. When the weight is heavy on your shoulder, rest your burden on mine. You'll always be my number one until the end of time. Number one.
You're my number one, baby.
Number
one. Hey, aloha everyone, and welcome to yet another very different and very unique life story. Now, we just heard Number One by Iration, and mid-podcast, we're going to hear A Place in the Sun from Maoli. Now, sharing his story today will be Daniel Tolson, and just as I said, he has a very unique life story, one that has included double knee replacement. Daniel's going to explain just why he needed to have those knees replaced. And Daniel's story begins right now. Daniel, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Well, thanks for having me here, Larry. It's good to be here.
And listeners, you can probably tell that Daniel's not from across the neighborhood from me. He's from across the world. And that's part of your story, right?
A big part of my story, and I think it might have started from my grandfather having paintings of naked Asian women in his house.
Well, that might explain why you're at where you are now. But
well, they talk about yellow fever, and I had all the injections when I was with the airlines, and I still got married to a beautiful Oriental woman. And so I think from the early days, that DNA of my grandfather from living in Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam was definitely passed down to me, because I feel more at home here in Asia than I ever did in Australia. So it's in the blood.
And you're in Taiwan now, but you grew up in New South Wales.
New South Wales. So New South Wales, we could call it the big state. And Sydney is the capital of Sydney, but Canberra and ACT is the capital of the country. So Sydney's the big city. And my family lived around about 70 kilometres northwest of Sydney. Northwest of Sydney is where you get the Blue Mountains. So you can't get any further than that. And so I grew up right in the western suburbs, and cutting through the Blue Mountains is a river called the Hawkesbury Nepean River. And it's a couple of 100 kilometres long. So we were close to the river, and we were always on the river, water skiing from a really young age, 5 and 6 years of age on the water. And so this part of the world is known for the Hawkesbury River, and that's where we grew up.
And I should mention that you were a kneeboarding champion. You even performed in the X Games. So did that have something to do with why you needed knee replacement?
Well, the sport was wakeboarding. So if people know what kneeboarding is, it's similar, but I'm just standing up. So it's kind of a blend of snowboarding and surfing. The knee operations were probably the result of a lot of other complications that started when I was young. And I would say I was around about 9 or 10, and I'd be at school playing sports, and I'd be running along, and my knees would just collapse. So imagine, Forrest Gump and his type of run. That's me running along, and the knees collapse. So the teachers are asking, what's wrong with Daniel? My parents are asking, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know. I'm just running and my knees collapse. And they'd go in all different directions. Sometimes I'd fall forward. Sometimes I'd collapse sideways. Sometimes I'd go backwards. I started to get a lot of pain in my knees. And when you're young, you don't really understand too much about life. But I thought, this is not good. That's all I could describe it as. And the problems kept going, and eventually my teachers started to report on my grades. And so the knees are collapsing, but the teachers are saying, Daniel doesn't pay attention. Daniel doesn't try hard enough. If Daniel only studied a little bit harder, he'd be a good student. Then my nose would bleed, and it would just be randomly bleeding. I'd be talking to you, it would just start to bleed. I'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, the nose is bleeding. My eyes would be puffy. I couldn't see properly. I couldn't hear properly. I would look at the board. I'd write what I thought was on the board, and I'd put it onto the paper, and it would come out in totally different words. And then the teacher would say, read what's on the paper. I could see what I wrote, but something else would come out. So they're looking at me going, there's something wrong with this kid. And so the teacher said, Mr. and Mrs. Tolson, is your marriage okay? Because your son seems to be having some problems. They're like, yeah, our marriage is fine. So I'm having these problems, and eventually I'm diagnosed with what's called linear sequential learning disability. And this disability says that I can't learn in a linear fashion. So if you teach me A, B, and the C, my brain doesn't compute what you're teaching me. So they said, well, let's call him gifted and talented, and we'll put your son in the gifted and talented classes. So my principal said, Daniel, we're going to put you in a special class called the Space Lab. And I thought, Space Lab, this sounds pretty cool. Must be for kids who are going to be astronauts. So I went to the space lab. I walked in, and the first day there was literally kids licking windows. There was kids pulling wings off flies. There was kids eating clag glue. And they put me in this room. And I thought to myself, this is the space lab because these kids are off the bloody planet.
Yeah.
So this is
they're
not for me.
spaced out.
They were spaced out. But that was my life for the next 5 years. I was in remedial therapy. And so what they discovered was that the knee problem was connected to the hip, and my hips were clicking, and my hips were clicking until I was 40. I only fixed it probably when I was 41. So my hips would click. They then discovered that my spine was twisted. They then realised that my neck was out of alignment. The neck was out of alignment, which created the cranial plates to be out of alignment in the skull. Those plates were pushing down the left and right hemisphere, which was creating the visual impairments, which led to tone deafness, which led to the learning disabilities. So for the next 5 years, they fixed me. And so I had that ongoing problem. And then by the time I got to age 16, I got Epstein-Barr virus, chronic fatigue. I'd be sleeping 13, 14, 15 hours a day. I was always tired, couldn't shake it. Eventually I dropped out of school because the teacher said, look, you're so far behind, you're going to have to repeat. That wasn't an option for me. I don't want to be with the other kids. It was hard enough already. And then in 1998, through sports, I had a big wipeout and I snapped my posterior cruciate ligament. And the posterior cruciate ligament is really strong, and it actually broke the bone. So I went to the doctor and he said, look, what we'll do is we'll just take the PCL out, and 12 months after that, you'll be able to ride again. So he removed the posterior cruciate ligament. I went out, started to ride again, had another big accident, and then tore all the cartilage. So I went back in for another operation. They removed all the cartilage. So it's been bone on bone since I was 18. And the doctor said, Daniel, you'll never ride again. And so that was his diagnosis in 1998. But all of my success came after that. So
Yeah,
that's how I ended up with the dodgy
and I
knees.
think I called it knee boarding, but yeah, it's wakeboarding. And
Wakeboarding.
And I say that because again, I don't know how you were by the river there, you say growing up, and started skiing and things at 5, 6 years old. You know, here, I don't know how many years ago it was, maybe 15, 20, probably more than that. People started pulling behind their ski boats, the boards, right? And then you have you're holding onto the rope. And then one of the first things you can do is you try to do a 360 and do a turnaround. And, you know, I got to that point and then I was like, okay, I'm done. But you took it a lot farther. And like you say, the wakeboarding, you're standing, you are standing. And I'm guessing, and I don't know this because I haven't seen the competition, but I'm guessing when you went to X Games or something like that, that probably involved some, I was going to say acrobatics or something. I mean, you're probably doing tricks, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, wakeboarding, if you can imagine what snowboarding is like. Mm-hmm. So it's like snowboarding behind the boat. We were probably the second generation riders in Australia, probably the third generation in the world, because one of my early idols was Ryan Sebring, and they used to call him the Flying Hawaiian. And so when I used to watch the videos, I would watch these wakeboarders in Hawaii, and we would learn by watching videos. So these people that I was watching on videos were one generation before me, and I would watch and learn. So to be able to get to the X Games, I was already a state champion in Australia. And then to get into the X Games, you had to qualify. And so I qualified in the top 10. So that was the top 10 in the world at that competition. And I was riding against the best riders in the world. And at that level, my brother and I, we were riding a little bit different. We used to ride faster. So we would ride of speeds up to 28 mile an hour on rope length that was 90 feet long, where most people were riding at 21 mile an hour and a rope length of about 65 foot. So when we're cutting in and hitting the wake, by the time we hit the wake and go up in the air, we could be exceeding 40 miles per hour. And then when we hit the wake and we land, we could be traveling 60, 70, 80 feet through the air. And when you hit the water, it feels like concrete.
Yeah.
And we would hit the water and immediately you'd get knocked out. You would break a bone, you'd stretch a ligament, you'd see stars for days. So imagine hitting that wake and now you're going upside down. You're doing a flip. You're doing a flip with a twist, and then you start to do a flip and you put a 360 in it. And some of these tricks that we're doing are 10 and 12 foot in the air at 40 mile an hour. So we learned to fall gracefully. We learned to crash. And so getting into the X Games, our trick run would include about 10 different flips and spins. And that was kind of the minimum requirement at that stage. Today, it's a totally different level, but times have changed, equipment's changed. But what we were doing back then was cutting edge.
And again, this was after at least some of your initial surgeries, right?
Yeah. This was, X Games was before my big surgeries, but afterwards I became an Australian champion. And my goal, I was interviewed in a magazine called Water Skiers News, and I was about 16. And they asked me, what's your goal? And the goal was to be an Australian champion. So I was very clear on what I wanted. But what I didn't realise at that stage is that when you set a goal, you also define your obstacles. And there's going to be a series of internal constraints, things that hold you back internally, and then external things like competition. So my journey to get to Australian champion was 10 years. 2 major knee surgeries, broken nose, torn ligaments, multiple concussions. I had 6 guys try to kill me by mistake. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, ended up in hospital for 3 days, 2 plates in the arm because they broke my arm when they tried to hit me in the face with a cricket bat, and I just got my hands up in time, and you can see my scar there. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, on the 6 weeks out from the Australian Championships, I took another fall and stretched some ligaments in my ankle. So for the 6 weeks lead up to the Australian titles, I couldn't even walk. I was on crutches. The only thing I could do was sit on the beach in Thailand and mentally rehearse. And the day that I won the Australian Championships, I got to the dock on crutches. I took my crutches off, hopped on the water, rowed, and I did exactly what I had imagined in my mind. Got off the water, hopped back on the crutches, qualified, top place, went back into the finals. I skipped the semis, went back on crutches, hopped on the board, perfect pass, hopped back on the crutches. So what I learned about goals is just because you want something, it doesn't mean you can, because there's going to be obstacles. And it's those obstacles that help you build character along the way. And so I had to deal with the knee pain for many years. And it was always my Achilles heel. But we're not allowed to make excuses. We've just got to deal with the cards we're being dealt and make the most of it.
It's really true. And when you watch sports, whether it's American football or European football, people don't care if you have an injury. They want you out there. I mean, they're buying tickets and it's expensive, and they want you there. So sometimes they talk about the athletes today not being as tough as the athletes of 30, 40 years ago that would play through the pain. But just how you mentioned earlier that today, the equipment's changed, things are different. That's why it's hard to compare today's athlete in baseball or football to somebody that played 40, 50 years ago, because things are just so different. And not just the equipment, but even the size of the athletes. I mean, people are just a lot bigger and they're just a lot faster. And so it is hard to compare. I was going to ask you, was one of your biggest competitors when you're doing the Australian state champion, your brother?
Was.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of lessons. The first lesson I learned was about telling yourself bullshit stories. And my brother had been out wakeboarding for probably months or years before I got out there. When he started, he found something that he loved, and he didn't want to share it. So he would go out and ride with his friends. He'd go to the cable ski park, but he wouldn't take me. And the reason why he wouldn't take me was because he finished school at 3:15 and I finished school at 3:20. And he wouldn't wait for 5 minutes for his little brother. So he got ahead really fast. The other thing that happened was when he got a little bit older than me, he had the ability to take the boat out to the river. And he would go out with his mates, but I couldn't drive. So I'd have to wait for Mum and Dad to take me to the river because he wouldn't wait 5 minutes. He would do all of his training, he'd do all of his riding, and he had a girlfriend. So by the time he had finished, he's like, see you later. And so for me, I could only ride a lot of times by myself. So the early years, you could say there was an unfair advantage. He got a lot of time ahead of me because I didn't have my driver's license. But what I learned was that was just competition. And there's going to be people out there who have got more money and can do it more often. But it doesn't mean they got more desire. Mm-hmm. And so for me, my desire level started up because I saw this person as my number one competitor. And if I had an hour to train, I had to make that hour count. And so I would figure out what he was doing and I would try to do it. But I realized that my body was built different. You were talking about the size of athletes. Mm-hmm. In my sport, bigger is not better. Lighter is better. So here I am, let's say I'm 18, I'm already 98 kilos. I'm solid, I'm thick, I'm built differently. My brother was probably 68 kilos. He was tiny, he was a featherweight. So it required less effort and it was less impact. So I'd watch him and then he decided he'd go to competitions. And he went to the competitions earlier than me and he started to win everything. And so then I was known as Ben's brother, not as Daniel, but as Ben's brother. And if you've ever been an athlete and you're living in somebody's shadow and they refer to you as Ben's brother, you feel really small and you want to start to prove yourself. Mm-hmm. So I started to go to the competitions and I could not beat him. And the reason why I couldn't beat him was he was incredibly technical. He could do the hardest tricks in the book. And when you're competing in what's called freestyle, you have to name 10 tricks. You go out and you do those 10 tricks and you're scored on the trick. Not on how good it looks, not on how big it is, not on how small it is, but just on the trick itself. I couldn't compete, not in that. But what I could compete on was a competition called Expression Session. And in Expression Session, you could do 3 tricks, you could do 9 tricks, you could do 11 tricks. You could do anything that was not in the book. And all that mattered was how good you made it look. So I could go out there and do these tricks that he couldn't do. I could do them bigger than everybody else. I could stay in the air longer than everybody else. And I built this reputation, and they used to call me Daniel Danger. And I would go out and do a trick that nobody had done before, that wasn't even in the book, and the judges loved it. I got competitive by finding my niche, and my brother was pissed. He hated the fact that I could beat him. He loved me because I'm his brother, but he hated me as his competitor. And at one competition, I brought it all together and I beat him. And I learned a very tough lesson. Was because I beat him, he then punished me and he left me at the competition zone. He drove home without me. So I had to call my mum, 2-hour round trip to come and pick me up. But that's competition. Mm-hmm. And he was my biggest competitor. He went through 5 knee surgeries.
I was just going to ask you if he had some of the same, issues with his knees and ligaments and broken bones and
back.
Things. Even though he's smaller and lighter, like you say, when you go up in the air and you're coming down and hitting that water, it's like concrete. It probably is an advantage to be a little bit lighter,
Yeah, well, he had 5 knee operations. He broke his back, and the shock was so bad that all of his hair fell out. He went bald because of the shock. But one thing was he was just relentless, and he took wakeboarding to the streets. So imagine skateboarders skating on the road, hitting rails. He ended up doing that with wakeboarding. So we designed these big pools. They held about 10,000 litres of water. And we would take these big pools and then we'd put a wakeboarding rail, like a handrail, and we would do a gap of 6 metres between one pool over concrete to the next pool. Eventually, he turned it into like a motorcycle ramp. So, you know, when you see these men at X Games and they hit their motorbikes on those giant ramps, he bought a ramp to a pool and then was doing 10 and 12 metre gaps across concrete and landing in a pool with a foot of water. So he took it to a totally different direction. I took the coaching and training route and travelled the world. He took it to the streets. So tough competitor and always pushing each other.
It seems like more of a daredevil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Doing what he was doing, landing in a foot of water.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of
that,
room for error. You know what I'm saying?
I didn't do it. And the reason why I didn't do it was I was having problems with my knees, but I was also thinking longer term. And when I became Australian champion, I think I was probably a little bit more mature than a lot of other people because I'd already been in business and I had a business. And what I realised was that with athletes, a lot of them hit their peak. They do very well and they retire. And after retirement, they miss the sport, they miss the adrenaline rush, and they try to make a comeback. And there's very few athletes who can ever successfully come back to a sport. You know, there's like Kelly Slater. He's a freak. There's a Hawaiian bodyboarder, Mike Stewart. He's a freak. And these people just have longevity, but they got a legacy name, where a lot of people try to come back and relive the glory days, but they ruin their reputation. They ruin their brand. And after 10 years of waiting to achieve my goal and finally hitting it, that's when I decided to retire and never to compete again because I wanted to leave on a high. And that high was really good for me because that year I was also given the front cover of Wake magazine. So like these inside sports magazines, I was on the front cover. I was on the pull-out poster. It was my greatest year. It just all came together. And I said at that stage, I'm walking away and I'm not coming back because my brand and reputation is important, but the longevity of my body is also important because when I'm 50 and 60 and 70, I want to be chasing my children and grandchildren around. But a lot of other people came back and they did major damage to their body, but they were known as a has-been. And people say, oh, do you remember when he used to do this? And so they forget about the glory days, but they always compare them to their last ride.
Right. And I think knowing when to, call it quits is really a tough thing for an athlete. I mean, like you say, some of them think they're done and then they sit out for a year and they just miss it. And I think they watch the things on television and they're like, I think I can still do it. And they go back and like you say, rarely are they successful. And, it's hard. I guess it's hard. I've always played sports, but not to that level. So I can't really relate, but I can understand what you're saying.
My grandparents were gamblers, big gamblers, and they were always playing poker and they're always gambling. And they would always say, you've got to know when to hold and when to fold. And that's what made them very good gamblers. They went from gambling to business and they were always successful because they knew when they'd got to their end point and they said, okay, we're out. So I'd learned that. The other thing with business is my brother and I, we turned our reputation into a brand. And we used to be sponsored by people like Spy Sunglasses, Casio watches, Reef Brazil, SMP, the wakeboarding brands. And people would give us product. And we'd get all this product and people would say, what are you wearing? Then they'd go and buy the shirt or the shorts or the shoes. They'd buy the boards. And my brother and I got really smart and we said, why are we wearing other people's clothes and they're getting rich? Why don't we just turn it into a business? So we started to make T-shirts in our parents' granny flat. And people saw the shirt and said, that's sick. I want to buy one. So we'd sell these shirts for $25. And instead of putting some famous face on our shirt, we would put a picture of us wakeboarding on our shirt because it was inspirational. It was core. People knew us and they're like, I want to wear you on a shirt. And so we started this brand called Liquid Militia. We started to make T-shirts. We then went into manufacturing. We went into reselling, and we had 50 shops across the country selling our merchandise. And we had a full range. We had shirts, shorts, shoes, hats, bags, stickers. And then we got really smart and we said, how do we promote ourselves and how do we build the brand? And my brother said, let's start to make wakeboarding videos. So we started to film ourselves ride. We got a computer, we edited it professionally, and we made our first wakeboarding movie. And it was on VHS. That's how long ago it was. And we showed people and they said, we want to buy a copy. The shop said, we want to buy it. So we produced our first video. We produced our second video, but we got a little bit smarter. In the second video, we started to recruit people for our brand. And we said, if you're willing to wear our clothes and be one of our team riders, we will put you in a movie and we'll promote you across the country. So the magazine started to follow us around. And what made us special, and this is before the days of drones, my uncle owned a helicopter. And we said to him, Uncle, would you bring your helicopter down to the river? Would you fly above the boat whilst we hang out the side of your chopper so we can film wakeboarding? He said, whatever it takes. He'd bring his helicopter down day after day after day, and we would film. We were the first people in the country to use helicopter footage in a movie. Mm-hmm. And we took that to market, and people were freaking out. They couldn't believe it. Australian riders getting filmed from a helicopter, people that we know, because we were always exposed to the American stuff. That's good, but Aussies want to see Aussies do it. And so then we made our third movie. And in the third movie, we had helicopters, we had our team riders, but we had our product placement. We manufactured our clothing a year in advance, so our team riders could wear it a year in advance and film in the latest gear. And the night that we launched the video, we launched the new range for the next year. And what happened was we had built such a following that we anticipated 300 people to come to the launch of our movie. 600 people showed up from around the country. 600. Mm-hmm. You don't even see 600 people lining up outside the Apple shop for the new iPhone. We had 600 people. The event organizer said, we're going to have to run the premiere 2 times tonight. You're going to have to do it once and you're going to have to do it again because there's 300 people who can fit into this room. We had bands, we had DJs, and all of a sudden our brand blew up. Every rider that we had on our team was known all across the country. And it just started to come together from years of building a brand and building a reputation. But being smart about it and saying, why don't we monetize this? Somebody else is going to get rich. Why don't we do it? And it was great. We built a community, and then I started to travel the world. And because I had this years of branding, I was in a place called Borneo. Most people have never heard of it. I was walking out next to this river, and there was all these thatched huts on stilts. And a guy was looking out his window, and he said, hey, he said, you're on TV. And I just laughed, and I looked at my girlfriend. She said, what's he talking about? He said, he reckons he saw me on television. And he said, come, look, you're on television. And my girlfriend said, go in and have a look. It was my brother. He almost looked identical to me. And he was on television. And a guy in Borneo is telling me that I'm on TV. So I went to the Middle East and I helped a gentleman launch a business in the Middle East. I was on television, in the press, in the radio. Went to the UK, coached over there, went to America, across Australia. And it just opened up so many doors.
Yeah. And you also went to Hawaii.
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah.
I remember it was in 2015. There was a big earthquake, 15th of September 2015. There was a huge earthquake. And I was on Kona, and the first thing that I noticed was the tremor, and then all the birds flew up out of the trees and started to leave the island. And I said to the people that I was with, I said, I think we're in trouble. They said, what is it? I said, I felt a big tremor. And then we realised that there was an earthquake in Chile, 8.3 magnitude. And so they were going to say, we have to evacuate the hotel we're at, because they were afraid that the tsunami was going to sweep around the island into the bay. But luckily, we avoided that. But ended up having a surf and a great time on the island. It was beautiful.
Yeah. We lived in Maui at that time. So we moved away in the August of 2016, so we were still in Maui. But you do get the earthquakes once in a while, and mostly from the Big Island because of all the, Maui has a volcano called Haleakala, but it is dormant, so not extinct. As a matter of fact, it's overdue. It should have blown, 50, 60 years ago. But man, there's still a lot of activity on the Big Island. I was there last year in April, and we left, and like 9 days later, it went off again. So there's still a lot of activity, but you're right. Yeah, you can be there, and you can feel the earth moving under your feet for sure sometimes.
And it's a reality. You see those lava flows.
Mm-hmm.
It's like being on another planet. We were driving from the airport to the resort, and I was looking at these lava flows. It was like my soul had left my body. I was like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And we stopped the car and we're walking through them, and some of them get these, what do you call them, like a tunnel or something, where the lava's flow through.
Yeah, lava tube.
Lava tube. Mm-hmm. And so we're down inside of that. And they're going from the mountain all the way down to the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just virtually killed or wiped out everything in terms of land, trees, shrubs, all the way down to the water. And then you get down to the water, and the beaches, instead of like a sandy beach, it's like a rocky type beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is bizarre. And then the contrast between the green grasses, the black lava, and the turquoise colour water. It's like, yeah, you're in Jurassic Park or the Land Before Time.
Yeah, it's a special place. There's no getting around it. I mean, it really is. And, those lava tubes, those volcanoes have been going off hundreds, thousands of years. And so the Hawaiians, they would take their chiefs, they were called, in Hawaii, it's called ali'i, and they would bury their bones in the lava tubes. And, secret, people weren't to know where they were, but a lot of times that's where they would bury them, was in the lava tubes. So, yeah, you probably went through the Thurston lava tube, would be my guess. If you went through one of the big ones and you get in so far, and if you turn off your light, it's completely dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. It's just, they're pretty amazing, for sure.
The Hawaiians are amazing people. One of my mentors, Dr. Tad James, he lived in Hawaii for many years, and he studied huna. Another one of my mentors, Dr. Richard Bandler, he lived in Hawaii. And they would always talk about the hunas and sensory acuity. They were very aware. They used their senses to live their life. And they had very simple philosophies, like if you eat something and you feel good, eat it again.
Mm-hmm.
If you eat something and it makes you feel bad, stop eating it.
Yeah.
Very simple philosophies, but smart. And then Dr. Tad James would talk about how they would travel from island to island. And he said they had no compass, but they had an internal compass. They had the ability to read the stars. So when they were in their boats travelling at night, they'd be guided by the stars.
Mm-hmm.
He would also say, in terms of using their senses, the Hawaiians could put their hand outside of the boat in the water and feel the different temperature and tell which current they were on and which one they should be to get to a particular island. He also said that they would lay down in a boat, they'd close their eyes, and based on the rocking of the boat, whether it was left or right, front or back, they could tell which stream they were on and where they should paddle and where they shouldn't. And they could travel from island to island only using their senses, and they'd never get lost. So as both Dr. Richard Bandler, who was the founder of NLP, and his first master trainer, Dr. Tad James, developed NLP, they were using knowledge coming from Hawaii. And that's another connection that I have.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you do a little research and each island had their own chief. And of course, they wanted to take over the other islands. And the thing that's interesting to me, I've done enough paddling. When we lived in Hawaii, we belonged to a canoe club and we paddled. I mean, you're tired. You're tired after just paddling a couple miles. These guys were in such awesome shape. They would paddle from the big island to Maui. And even if you cut it the closest, it's still 30 miles. And the guys on Maui could see them coming. So they're ready. They're ready for battle. These guys would get there in their outrigger canoes after paddling for 30 miles and get up and do battle. It just blows my mind. I just can't imagine the warring that went on to try to unite those islands. Yeah, so I can get going on Hawaii for a long time.
Like a long, lonely stream, I keep running towards a dream. Moving on, moving on. Like a branch on the tree, I keep reaching to be free. Moving on, moving on. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart's gonna run. 'Cause there's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, gotta find me a place in the sun. Like an old dusty road, I get weary from below. Moving on, moving on. Like this tired, troubled earth, I've been rolling since my birth. Moving on, moving on. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart's gonna run. 'Cause there's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, gotta find me a place in the sun. There's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart's gonna run. 'Cause there's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, gotta find me a place in the sun. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart's gonna run. 'Cause there's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, gotta find me a place in the sun. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart's gonna run. 'Cause there's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, gotta find me a place in the sun.
I wanted to shift a little bit, though, and talk about, so we know that you didn't graduate high school. You had Epstein-Barr. You had some other issues that you had to deal with. How did you go from that to a really high position with, the Emirates airline?
Definitely wasn't a glamorous way there. Well, my parents, I like to say, were in porn. And they were the local porn stars, and they owned a pawnbroking business.
I should say you're saying pawn, not porn. So
yeah, porn. So I spent 17 years in porn. And after my brother and I were in business, we separated and went different ways. And my parents said, do you want to take over the family business? They said, if you take it, it's a curse. I said, I don't want the curse. And so I went and travelled. And as part of my travels, I ended up in the Middle East. And I was coaching wakeboarding. And my girlfriend at the time was cabin crew with Emirates Airline. And I saw her role and I thought, that's a really cool job. But I don't know how to get into it. So we went our separate ways, and I ended up coming back to Australia. And when I got back to Australia, I tried to go to university because I knew that study was important, that certificates were important. And I went to university, and after the first semester, all of my professors encouraged me to leave. And they said, Daniel, if you want to succeed at university, you're going to have to go back to school and finish your school certificate. You're going to have to learn how to write essays and all of these other things. I said, is it all that important? I said, I might have a learning disability. I'm intelligent. And I said, I'm failing not because of the knowledge or the application. I'm failing because you're asking me to write essays, something that I'm not skilled at. Isn't there a better way? Because when I was at school, teachers would help me. And they'd say, Daniel, if you don't know the answer but you can articulate it, that's okay. Tell us what the answer is and we'll just write it down for you. So they'd give me a scribe. Now, I'm not an idiot. I'm not dumb. I'm not disabled. I just can't do exams. So after the first semester, I had to drop out. I didn't want to go back to the family business. I was doing some labouring, builder's labour, concreter's labouring, and then I took a job directing traffic. And it was kind of the lowest point in my life. Directing traffic on the job site is the easiest job to get and the worst one to have because everybody just treats you like dirt. And so I was doing that, and I thought to myself, is this my life? Is this my reality? Is this what I was here to achieve? And I was getting really angry. And, you know, when you have these moments, you start to look to the heavens and you start to negotiate and bargain with God. You know, if this is what you've sent me here to do, this is screwed up. And so one night I was finishing work and I was driving home across the harbour bridge. You're going to see it soon when you go to Australia. Mm-hmm. And when I was crossing the harbour bridge, I looked up and I saw this white building. I'd never seen it before. It's 40 years old. And it's got this big sign across the top, Emirates. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and apply for this job. And so I looked in the paper and they said, we're recruiting. I rang the number and they said, we're interviewing next week. I said, well, put my name down. I'll be there. And so I went and got my hair cut. I know how to talk. I know how to present myself. I went to the interviews and I killed it in every single interview. The first round, they said, welcome back to round 2. The second round, they said, welcome back to round 3. I got the telephone call and they said, you've got the job. And I said, yes. I said, when can I start? They said 6 weeks from now. I said, no, I'm talking like, can I start now? They're like, we'll get your visa and we'll get you over here. And I got there, and that was 2008. And I felt that Dubai was what the Maoris call is a tudonga waiwai. I felt that Dubai was my belonging place. And I felt that all of my life skills are actually starting to be valued. Where back in Australia, nobody really cared about what I was doing. All they wanted was a certificate. They didn't care about the sports or the business history. It's like, do you have a certificate? If you don't have a certificate, you can't get a job. So I went there. They didn't care about the certificate because they were looking for character. Mm-hmm. They were looking for emotional intelligence in their interviews. And so I went to the training college, and in the first 6 weeks of the training college, you get a license to fly on many different aircrafts. You've got to be licensed to operate the emergency doors and do the procedures. And what I quickly learned was all of my learning disabilities came back because during those 6 weeks I had to sit constant exams. And I went almost back in time from age 28 to age 9. And I could not pass a true-false test. I could not pass a multiple choice test on a computer. Every learning disability I had came back. And I was so upset internally. I thought, for everything that I'm done, I'm now going to fail in this career because I can't pass the test. And my managers called me and they said, Daniel, you've been selected and now you're failing. What are you doing? Are you out partying? Are you mucking around? Because you're failing. And I said, I am studying. I don't go out. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I run. I study. I come here. I go to sleep. And they said, well, if you can't pass your exams, you'll never be able to operate on the aircraft. I said, look, I don't want to sound like a victim, but I grew up with learning disabilities. I need some help. I need somebody to write the answers down. I can tell you what it is. And they said, we can't do it for you. So the stress and the pressure came back, and I'd go back in and eventually I'd get 100%. And so they go, oh, look, you can do it. But for me to do the exam took everything out of me. All of my mental, my emotional, my physical, my spiritual energy all went into that. So I'd pass that and I knew I wouldn't have to worry about it for another year. For a whole year I would study, and when I got back to the exam, same thing, I'd fail. I'd have to go back to the office, explain myself. So I knew my pattern and I knew it was going to be a big challenge. But I was really good on the aircraft. I was really good working with a team. Eventually I got promoted to become a senior flight steward. The responsibility of a senior flight steward is to lead 17 new cabin crew. My team was 17,500 people. Every flight I went on, I was given 17 new people to lead, 400 customers, and I could do it flawlessly. But every year I had to come back for the exam and I'd fail. Every year I'd virtually get a warning. Daniel, you failed. You've been called back in the office. You've got to sit the exams again. So I'm going through that. That's one of my major struggles. But in the background, my wife had an accident, and she was flying back from London Heathrow into Dubai. And in 2010, she had an accident on the aircraft, and she ended up suffering a fractured knee in 5 places. So whilst I'm at the peak of my career in leadership, my wife just hit rock bottom. And for 2.5 years, she was in rehabilitation, 3 major knee surgeries. She had 1 in Dubai, 2 in the United Kingdom. She had PTSD. The PTSD was so bad that she even wanted to take her own life, and she didn't want to live anymore because of the mental, emotional, physical stress of it all. And I'm trying to navigate my career. And they were the most exciting but most challenging years I've ever faced, because there was almost no joy. It was just constant stress. Stress from exams, coming home, taking care of my wife, worrying if I was going to come home and she'd be dead or alive because the PTSD was that bad. And then eventually, end of 2012, maybe the start of 2012, my wife fell pregnant, but she's got PTSD. She's just come off the back of 3 major operations. And then the company says, look, you've been in rehabilitation for 2.5 years. We've supported you for 2.5 years. Your job's no longer available. We're going to have to terminate you. She's pregnant. The stress, she almost miscarriages 3 times. So now I'm going to work thinking, is my wife going to be alive and is my baby going to survive? And when you're an expatriate living in Dubai, once your contract is terminated, you have to leave the country. So now I'm living in the Middle East with a pregnant wife who doesn't live here anymore. She's living in Taiwan, and I'm trying to work and navigate life. And that were tough years, mentally, emotionally. And then I got to a stage where I said to my company, I said, look, my wife, you know her story. You know she's pregnant. You've been really nice to me. You've given me all of my holidays in advance for 2.5 years. I have no time off for the birth of my child. Would you please let me go back to Taiwan for a week? And they said, Daniel, we can't give you time off. You can bid for leave, you can ask for leave, but we can't guarantee it. If you've got days off, you can go back for the birth of your daughter. And so I was at a fork in the road. I had to choose my career, co-leading a team of 17,500 people as a senior flight steward, or be there for the birth of my daughter, who I'd already come close to losing 3 times. So I said to the company, I said, thank you. I really appreciate everything that you've done for us, but here's my resignation. My daughter is more important than my income. My daughter's more important than my career. And so I had to walk away. I didn't have to, but I chose to. That was more important. But what I learned at Emirates has been the foundation of everything that I take business people through today. There's not much that I haven't been through that business people haven't been through, and I can show them how to navigate.
Your story, Daniel, if you think about it, there's at least 4 or 5 major pivot points in your life story, where this happened, so you pivoted. This happened, so you pivoted. And some people never do. I mean, some people just they get a job, they work it, they retire. But you basically take the cards. I'll use the terminology of your grandparents. Take the cards that were dealt to you. You just make something out of that hand, and maybe it's not a winning hand at first, but through some strategy and different things, you end up pivoting. And it seems like to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like each time one of these things has happened, it's actually been a good thing long term. You just kept moving forward.
Well, it's what 50 Cent says. He says you got to turn shit into sugar.
Yeah.
And like a good poker player, you don't have to have the best hand to win.
That's right.
You've just got to know how to play it. And although they've been tough years, I wouldn't say it got any easier. I think the illusion is that when we're young, time is going to solve our problems. But as we get older, some of us want more. And when we decide we want more, it also invites more challenges. Because being a spiritual being, I also believe that the gods will test you of the good things that will come. And if you want big stuff, you're going to have to overcome big obstacles. Now, I thought it was going to be smooth sailing when I got into business. I had saved my money, I had sold property, and I invested it in business. And what do we hear? You've got to invest before you get a return. And if you invest, you'll get a return. No, it's not guaranteed. I lost all of my money, all of my savings in the first year of business. Everything that I'd saved up, I lost it. It wasn't because I was stupid. It was because I had to go through a learning period. And that learning period in business, oftentimes you've got to figure out what doesn't work. The average business fails in the first 2 years. Another half of businesses fail within the final 4 years. And very few businesses ever survive. And the average business globally takes 7 to 8 years to get profitable. And I knew that at the start of my journey. And I said, okay, well, if I can make it through my first year, that's better than most. If I can get to the 3rd year, I might be able to pay myself a little bit of money. If I can get to the 7th year, I'll start to make good money. But by the time we get into these years, other things happen. 2019 came. I was about to move my family back to Australia to expand my business. I'd bought a business. I was operating remotely. I was traveling the world. But my son was born in 2017. I didn't want to travel a lot, but I said, why don't we move to Australia as a family? And then COVID came. That business, I had to shut down. I had to shut down companies. And we had to go through that whole thing. But I said to my wife, we've been through worse. You've had your accident. We've had children. We've survived. We'll get through this. And it's the learnings that are important. And for me, by the time we got through COVID, our business had grown. We hadn't reduced our fees. We put our fees up. We learned so much. But it's the willingness to face it. And I think there's 2 things that I've learned about people is a lot of people, including myself, is we get a victim's mentality. We roll over, we show our belly, we get kicked in the guts, and we feel that the world or other people are out to get us. And we start to come up with all these excuses why we can't have what we want. But at the heart of it, it's a victim's mentality. And it's to do with our solar plexus. And if our soul is not into what we do, we suffer. The second thing is we've been taught affirmations. We've been taught we've got to feel good. Well, as an athlete, 99% of the time, I feel like shit.
Yeah.
I'm concussed. I'm talking to you. I'm concussed. I'm taking painkillers for my knee. I'm limping around. I can't sleep. I'm at the chiropractor every couple of days. My life is shit. It hurts. And as an athlete, you learn most of the time it hurts. And 1% of the time at the glory times. But athletes accept the pain. Business people accept it's going to hurt. But most people just want to feel good all the time. So if you can master those two things, if you can understand that most of us feel like a victim and just accept that's part of the journey, but stop making excuses. You know, what I like to say, Larry, is that we're walking bags of water. Our body is about 70% water, and negative thoughts impact our biology. And when we have negative thoughts, we feel like a victim, we change the chemistry of our body. But we've got to learn not just to think positive, but we've got to learn to stop thinking like a victim. These are crucial. Maybe I've got an advantage. Maybe my life was shit most of the time, but now I just learn how to deal with those disappointments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things about your show, it's about figuring out who you really are. I'm very aggressive. I'm very angry. I get very frustrated. Why is that? Because I have goals and I want to win. The anger internal is my fuel. I don't project my anger onto others. I project it towards myself. It's my fuel. I'm also somebody who's discontented. I am never satisfied. Number one is not good enough. And so this is my fuel. When I was state champion, once it wasn't good enough. When I was state champion twice, it wasn't good enough. When I was 3-time state champion, it wasn't enough. I had to get to the X Games. I had to become Australian champion. And so this thing that burns within me is I want to win, and it doesn't matter what I win at, it's never good enough. So for me, there's so many things I can achieve. There's always another win coming up. So I'm looking forward to the next thing that I can overcome.
You know,
but I learned that along the way.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking, I think Ben's taking some credit for this, because if he hadn't left you to have to walk home or come late, see, maybe you wouldn't be driven so much now. So he's probably taking some credit for your achievements.
Yeah, well, when I was younger, he would come and hit me, and my mum would say, be careful, he'll be bigger than you one day, and you won't be able to outrun him. He was a fast runner, a good sprinter, but he was terrible at long distance. And so I look at myself like a long distance runner in life. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are trying to get a win today, and they think they're going to get their 15 minutes of fame and everything's going to be fine. No, we're in a marathon. I want to be alive till I'm 100, and I want to be crossing that finishing line in good health, because there's going to be people who do a quick sprint. They're going to get the quick win and they're going to do nothing with their life. And I think there's people out there who feel like that. They feel like they got their peak at high school. I got straight A's student and my glory days were at school, and now I've suffered my whole life. They get the job and nothing else happens. Now they're just waiting for their manager's manager to die. And they think if we can just stick around here for another 34 years, we'll get a bit of glory. We're not wired like that. I mentioned that I had a learning disability. It doesn't mean that I can't learn. I learn differently. I went and studied the work of a doctor called Dr. Edward de Bono. And Dr. Edward de Bono wrote 70 books on critical thinking and teaching your children how to think. I would fly to and from Dubai to a place called Brass Bussa Complex. Sorry, from Dubai to Singapore. I'd get to Singapore, I'd go to Brass Bussa Complex. And there was a second-hand bookstore that sold the books of Dr. Edward de Bono. I'd buy 10 at a time. I'd come back to Dubai and I'd study them. I'd go back to Singapore, another 10, and I'd bring suitcase loads of books home. And I studied his work to change the way that I thought. And what I learned from Dr. Edward de Bono is that human beings need to have a win every 6 weeks. If you don't have a short-term goal to achieve every 6 weeks, you'll feel like you're dying. And he mapped it out very clearly. He said humans need ISML goals. You need to have immediate goals. You need to have a list to work through today. And every time you tick that box, you get a shot of free drugs, dopamine, serotonin in your body. You start to feel wonderful. You feel that this day actually counts. He said you also need to have short-term goals. You need to be having a win every 6 weeks. So you should be setting goals for the next 28 days. So you're constantly having a bigger win. He said then you need to have medium goals. You need to be looking out into the future, 365 days, to achieve something bigger, so that you realize that everything that I do today counts. Everything that I do today adds up to the next 7 days. Everything I do in the next 7 days is going to get me to my 28-day goal. Those 3 cycles of 28 gets you to your 90-day goals. And what happens is you get this forward momentum. You feel like you're winning. It changes your psychology. It changes your emotion. It changes your physiology. And then he said you need to have a long-term goal. You need to be projecting out there 10 years from now. Where do you want to be 10 years from today? And if you can simultaneously think about where you are now and where you want to be in 10 years from now, you'll quickly see that everything counts. You'll see that those little obstacles today are minute in comparison to that big thing you want to achieve. And I took that psychology and I applied it. And I look at today's struggle and I look at where I want to be. And I imagine I'm there looking back towards now. And I put the pieces of the puzzle together. And when we do that, we feel like we're a winner. That's why athletes train, because every day you feel like you've had a win. You've just done a personal best. And you carry that momentum forward. You know, we should spend most of our time living in the future. Most of us spend our time living in the past. The past is already done. There's nothing you can do about it. But everything you do today can change your future. And these things you can learn. You're not born with it. You got to pick it up on the way.
You know, I grew up in a high demand religion, and I can honestly tell you that if you're part of a high demand religion, everything you're doing is for the future. Sometimes, especially now when I look back, I think, you know, I'm going to enjoy today. I'm going to enjoy where I'm at in life, but yet you have to keep that future in mind. You can't just eat, drink, and be merry and then not worry about tomorrow. So, I mean, you've still got the cable bill is going to show up and the gas bill and different things like that. So you're right. You have to have goals. And when I was in business, I used to tell my employees, and you've heard this, I'm sure, you know, make a SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, tangible. Make it a SMART goal. You know, don't set such a high goal that you can never achieve it and then get discouraged and don't try anymore. So I know that as I read a little bit about your background, that this is kind of what you're doing now. You've worked with over 25,000 different individuals and trying to help coach them, I guess, and help them to understand some of the things that you're talking about right now. That's what people need, especially if they feel like they've plateaued. Sometimes they need something to spark them and get them going again. And I'm sure that, you know, that's what you're obviously good at.
Now, what you're saying about the goals, we say that future intent determines present action. And if you're really clear on where you're going, it's very easy to take a step forward. But the other thing is that if there is no future intent, if there is no future goal, you have no future. There's nothing out there for you. And this is why people don't act, because it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless for them to act because it takes them nowhere. So everybody knows the importance of goal setting. Nobody will ever argue about the importance of goal setting. People just don't understand how important it is. And the reason why people don't set goals is they're afraid of failure. Well, what if I set the goal and I don't achieve it and I feel disappointment and I feel like a loser? Other people don't set goals because they fear rejection. Because all of us have had a dream, a hope, or a wish. A lot of girls want to grow up to be a princess. A lot of boys want to grow up and they want to be a sheikh. And somebody says, get real, you can't be a princess, you can't be a sheikh. But what we hear is, you've criticised my dreams. And we quickly learn that when we share what's important to us, people have a say on it. So we stop setting goals. But what we should do is we should just stop telling people our goals. I have dreams, hopes, wishes, desires. The first thing I said to my mum, I said, Mum, I want to become cabin crew. I want to travel the world. She almost broke down in tears and she said, are you gay? I said, Mum, no. I said, I'm not gay. I'm going to go out and I'm going to fly around the world with 17 of the hottest women all day. And I said, the other guys might be gay, which just gives me more opportunity.
There you go.
And so like all of us have had that. And we realize, yeah, sharing your hopes, dreams and wishes invites criticism. So don't tell people. The other thing we've learned along the way, and this is a very American thing in comparison to a British or an Australian things, there's a great author and his name's Grant Cardone. And he's got a whole movement called the 10X movement. And he says, if your goal is to earn $1 million, it should be 10 million. If your goal is 10 million, it should be 100 million. But the problem with that is with a SMART goal, if you set a goal to earn $1 million and you quickly change it to 10, automatically inside of your heart, inside of your subconscious mind, you know it's impossible. How can you take your income from 50,000 to 10 million in one step? It's impossible. And so by doing that, it sets us up for failure. We sabotage our own success. We know it's not possible. If you want to become a millionaire, first of all, you've got to become a thousandaire. And if you can't become a thousandaire, you can't become a 10,000aire. And if you can't become a 10,000aire, you can't become a 100,000aire. So on and so forth. So we have to build a track record. When we set SMART goals, it has to be a really simple goal. You've got to be able to look at your 8-year-old son and say, this is my goal. Do you understand it? It's got to be simple. It's got to be very specific. It's also got to be measurable and it's got to be meaningful. If I set a goal to start a company that sells secondhand cars and I hate cars and I hate selling, I'll never achieve the goal because it doesn't have any meaning to me. It's also got to be achievable. And there's an old saying, just because you want to doesn't mean you can. You might want to play NBA. You might want to do a slam dunk. You might want to go up against Scottie Pippen and all the world's best Michael Jordan. But you're 4'5". Just because you want to doesn't mean you can. But being 4'5" might be better at another sport. And this is where people get stuck. They set goals that aren't suited for their personality type. For me, I study every single day. I've probably read 3 books this week, but I know if I go to university, I'm going to have that same challenge because I have a limitation and I can't get past that. But it doesn't mean I can't earn more than a doctor. It doesn't mean that I can't help people get healthier in other ways. So I become a coach. Well, that's like a doctor because the word doctor means to teach. And I teach people every day. So it's got to be achievable. And if somebody like a coach gives you really good feedback, they should be asking you, the first goal that you set, do you have a 100% chance of success? If you don't have a 100% chance of success and you have a 1% chance of failure, in your mind, you will second guess yourself. So the first goal you should be absolutely be able to achieve. The second goal should have a 99% success rate and a 1% failure rate. Because like in sports, you've got to learn to fall gracefully. You've got to learn to lose gracefully. You've got to get the feedback and then you've got to course correct. And then only once you've got a track record of success, only then should you start to move out of your comfort zone. And that's the critical part. It's got to be achievable. It's got to be realistic and it's got to be timed. I look at my clients' goals. I had one gentleman recently. He's currently earning $1.5 million. His next goal was to earn $3 million. And I asked him, have you ever earned $3 million before? He said, never. I said, when did you set this goal? He said, 3 years ago. I said, why haven't you achieved it? He said, I don't believe it's possible. And so he got stuck at 1.5. And I said, well, you can successfully earn 1.5. What's your track record? He said, well, a couple of years ago, I went from nothing to 500. 500 to 600, 600 to 700, all the way up to 800, 900, 1.5. And I said, good. So let's set a goal for an extra $150,000. Let's achieve that. Let's just get it believable. In the next 28 days, he added an extra $150,000 worth of income. I said, now do you believe it's possible to earn more? He said, absolutely. I said, good, let's stretch it to another 10%. So already in half a year, he's improved his performance, but he believes he can do it. Where before he doubted it was possible for him. So we've got to be realistic with what we can achieve. And realism comes with time. It's possible for everybody to be a millionaire here. Maybe just not today. But if you give yourself enough time.
Yeah, I remember the old expression, if it is to be, it's up to me. And but it's hard to do if you don't believe in yourself. So, yeah, you're right.
I was doing a podcast with a Dr. Tanya King Muhammad. So we were talking about selling. And there's 2 sales that you've got to make. You've got to make one to the customer, but that's the second sale. The first sale you've got to make is you've got to be sold on yourself. And that's what I was talking to Dr. Tanya King Muhammad about last night. There's a lot of people get into sales, but they don't know how to sell themselves. They haven't sold themselves on their greatness, their ability to achieve something. It's like as a coach and a consultant, I teach my clients how to set and achieve their goals. But if I hadn't had a lifetime of setting and achieving goals, I wouldn't think it's possible for me. And if it's not possible for me, how could I encourage somebody else to set and achieve goals if I knew it didn't work for me? So for me, I had to make sure that I could set and achieve goals. I absolutely believe it. I've got a trophy in the back here. Mm-hmm. In 1 year, I acquired 1,350 new customers. In 1 year. Then I was awarded that trophy by a gentleman by the name of Brian Tracy. Brian Tracy wrote the book, Eat That Frog. Brian Tracy trained 5 million people around the world how to sell. He taught me how to sell, taught me how to manage my time. Then he gave me an award for acquiring 1,350 customers in a year. So when I say to my customers, you can set and achieve goals. You can increase your income. You can become better at selling. I've already sold myself on the possibility. And that's the first most important sale. Once you've done that, it's easy to help other people.
And the opposite of that is if you haven't sold yourself, it's hard to sell to somebody else. And, I was sitting here thinking while you're talking, I was imagining you hobbling on those crutches to the competition after you'd spent time on the beach, imagining it in your mind, and then getting out there. So I guess what I'm saying is you have to sell yourself, but you also have to be realistic that there's going to be some obstacles. That's just, part of the process, part of you need to overcome and keep moving forward. This takes me back to my days in business. So, this is so interesting because that's all I did was basically coach. I was over a bunch of stores. I had a lot of employees, and people say, what do you do? I go, I'm a professional motivator, because that's how I viewed myself. Really, I'm supposed to go into this city, talk to these people, and leave them with something that is going to help them achieve goals. So yeah, I really enjoy this stuff because it works.
I did rock up on trophies, but why did I really go, Larry? I just went to get the trophy. Because in goal setting, what's really important is to know what the outcome is. Now, imagine this. I could have imagined in my mind doing the perfect pass up and down the lake. Now, I could have done the perfect pass, but that is not the goal. The goal is to win and get the trophy. So when I set the goal, the image that I had held in my mind for that entire year was me standing on the podium, holding the trophy above my head. Because with that in mind, that tells my body that I have won the competition. The winning pass was just part of it. So when we do goal setting, we've got to start with the end in mind. What is the ultimate takeaway from this? How do you know that you've achieved the goal? Well, the only way that I know that I've achieved the goal of becoming the Australian champion is if I'm standing on the podium in number one position and I'm holding the trophy over my head. Mm-hmm. And that's what I thought about most of the time. Riding with a busted ankle was just a slight inconvenience. And what was really interesting, Larry, was somebody took a photo, they put it in the newspaper, And just as I had imagined in my mind, that picture showed up in the newspaper. And so we always talk about the end of the movie technique. How do you know you've successfully achieved this goal? If you're only going up and down the lake, you might have done the perfect pass, but somebody else still could have been on the podium. You've got to see yourself on the podium. And that's really important because, like we said before, future intent determines present action. If my intention is to become the Australian champion, then I must ride with a busted ankle. And that's just what's got to happen. And there's no excuses. There's no bitching. There's no moaning. There's no whinging. That's the goal. You're allowed to change your time frames. My time frame changed over 10 years. It went back. But you're not allowed to change the goal. If you set the goal, it's important to you. And then you've got to be willing to do whatever it takes. And just because you set the goal doesn't mean that you're guaranteed of success. But just because you don't achieve it or you fail, it doesn't mean you're allowed to quit. And that's the problem, is most people change the goal. You're not allowed to change the goal. You set the goal because it was part of your intention. But if you keep changing your intention, then your mind gets confused. It's like when I wanted that job at Emirates Airline. I already saw myself flying around the world. I knew what the intention was. It's like with my businesses. I always know what the intention is. I can't control the market. I can't control the wars, but I'm not allowed to quit because there's a war going on in Iran and another war going on in Ukraine. That's just a slight inconvenience. Mm-hmm. And if we all had that stubbornness, and this is where people say, he's got a learning disability. I'm incredibly stupid. I'm incredibly dumb because I don't listen to my own bullshit. And a lot of highly intelligent people with a very high IQ, they end up buying their own bullshit story, and they will create scenarios, and they will convince you with their intellect that success is not possible. The most amount of millionaires in America right now are people with low IQs, but they've got a very high EQ. They have a very high emotional quotient. People with a high IQ have a disadvantage. They can talk themselves out of anything. They can find all the facts, all the data, all the research on why something won't succeed. Where people with a high EQ, they say, I don't care what you tell me. Sorry, a high EQ, I don't care what you tell me. I'm willing to do the work. I will reinvent myself. I will become the person who needs to achieve that goal. And this is why emotional intelligence is the biggest predictor of success. 58% of your success is going to come down to your emotional intelligence. 7.5%, according to the Stanford Brain Institute, 7.5% of your success in life will come down to your knowledge. The other 7.5 will come down to your acquired skills. Knowledge is cheap. You can read the best books for $10. Skills are cheap. The average skill takes about 20 hours to learn. But the other 85% is your attitude. The biggest predictor of success is your attitude, according to Stanford Brain Institute. Your attitude is your angle of approach. It's the way that you approach something. You can approach something with a fear of failure, or you could approach something with the hope of success. And I know personally, if I approach something with a fear of failure, I will back out, whether it be a trick on the wakeboarding or in business. But if I approach that goal with the hope of success, I'll be willing to take a hit. I'll be willing to get out of my comfort zone. I'll be willing to try something new. And every time I do something, I get a little bit more hope. You know what? I think I can do it. I know I can do it. And so emotional intelligence is the biggest predictor of success. Nobody can convince me otherwise. I've seen it. I know it. I know people who have been brought up with nothing. I got a client. He lives in Texas. He was born in the slums of India. His first job in America was cleaning dishes. Today, he runs a business with 320 employees with revenues exceeding $5 billion US. He buys and sells businesses, flips them, and they're billion-dollar businesses. Just before the pandemic, he did his biggest flip. He bought a business for $4 billion and sold it for about $6 billion. His first job was washing dishes. He didn't get lucky. He made his own luck.
And you know what? I have a lot more respect for those people. If you're somebody that's successful, but you came from parents who were successful and you didn't have to really get out there and wash dishes, that's good. But I respect the person that started as a dishwasher or something else, So Daniel, I really appreciate it, man. This has been some good stuff. I loved your story. It was great. Your whole life has been overcoming whatever's out in front of you. I mean, whether it's a learning disability, whether it's a busted up ankle, inability to take a multiple choice test or true false, but you just kept after it, and I think that's what it's all about. Like you say, it's not the IQ, it's the EQ, and so much of the stuff you said just resonates with me because it's just something I believe too. I mean, I may not have the success that others have had, but I've been able to do the things that were important to me and achieve the goals that I set for myself. And I'll be honest with you, we haven't really talked about this, but I saw a girl across the way at a swimming pool, and I thought to myself, man, I should go talk to her. And I did. And we joke about it now. What if I didn't? What if I was too embarrassed or, fear of failure, right? But, next week we'll be 45 years married. So I'm glad I did. and you know what? I had a goal, and a goal was to find somebody that I could be happy with. And it didn't work out the first time, but it worked out the second time. So you got to keep working towards your goals. So
in sales, Larry, we've always been taught the customer is always right. That's false. The customer is only right in a matter of taste. And what we've got to realize that all of us in life have a different palate. We have a different taste for women. We have a different taste for men. We have a different taste for sports. We have a different taste for success. We have a different taste for the value of money. And if we realize that we have a different taste, we can then stop comparing our journey to everybody else's. And the moment that we stop comparing our journey to everybody else's, we just start to enjoy our own. And that's the key, is we're so vain. We're so caught up in what other people think and feel. My grandmother died, and I used to say to my clients, I say, when somebody dies in your family, the next biggest thing that you're going to be concerned about is the next meal that you eat. And sure enough, I got the call, Daniel, your grandmother's died. It was 11:30. I got to wait at 1 o'clock. What's my next biggest thing in life? I got to wait. And the point of that is not that I don't love my grandmother. I loved her very much. But we're so caught up in thinking that other people are worried about what we're doing. Nobody's really watching. Nobody cares. You're going to die. Somebody's going to be concerned about their next meal. What you got to do is you got to make every minute count. And if you just watch what you're doing and you live with a healthy set of blinkers, you block out all the bullshit. You enjoy your journey. You enjoy your success. And when those blinkers are on, you stop comparing yourself to others. Because when you start to realize what's happening in other people's lives, you think to yourself, would I want to go through all of that just to have that? Would I want that business if I had to actually deal with those employees every day? Would I want that income if I had to sacrifice my family for 18 years? What if I couldn't see my children for 18 years? For me, my priority is to wake up at 6, take my kids to school, finish work early, bring them home, go for dinner. I want time. There's consultants who earn more money than me, and I look at them and say, it costs you your family. I don't want it to cost my family. Mm-hmm. And so I just focus on me. And so if we all just do that and realize that our taste is our taste and you can't compare it, and we're on our own journey through life, it gets better fast.
Comparison is the thief of joy. So
that's the one.
Yep. All right, Daniel. Hey, man, I really appreciate it. I love doing this podcast because I love meeting people like you. Long after this podcast is over with, I will remember our time here together today, and you've said some things that were going to stick with me for a long time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Hey, if you like this podcast, get onto Apple and rate and review it. By doing that, you'll enable others to find the podcast and hear stories like Daniel's. So I do appreciate everyone that tunes in our 137 countries. So Daniel, somebody's going to be listening to this in Taiwan.
Yeah, Washu Daniel.
All right, buddy. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for your time.
So that was Daniel Tolson. And if you want to reach out to Daniel, you can find him at daniel@danieltolson.com. Thanks again for tuning in.
Down a little old country road not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story.
Sit down and relax, stay a little while. It's been so long since I've seen your smile. Well, a little of this and a little of that. Funny how the time just slips away.
Cuz, we gonna talk story.
Eh? Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Woo, time for friends to share. Time to hear what's